Great. I make it past, so I think we're going to start our session now. It's a very packed and exciting agenda this week at the World Data Forum, so I imagine we might get people coming in a little bit later from different sessions and so on, but we will start and hope people will join us in due course. So welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here for the World Data Forum and for this session in particular on integrating citizen science into the official SDG monitoring processes, as well as a proposal to use unofficial statistics for SDG reporting, particularly in the current context to deal with crisis monitoring and of course the current COVID epidemic, which we'll discuss in some detail over the course of our session. My name's Jessica Espy. I'm going to be your moderator. I'm the director of SDSN Trends. If you haven't heard of it, SDSN Trends is a global virtual think tank made up of experts from around the world, lending their insights, knowledge and expertise to help us think through how to manage all the new data and information that we have available today to help monitor sustainable development, and how to do so in a way that makes sure that it's a sustainable input to official monitoring and will go the distance of the SDG period. And delighted to say that actually two of our participants today, Gillian and Dilek, are both members of SDSN Trends. So it's a real pleasure to organise this event in partnership with IIASA, UNCTAD, ourselves, as I mentioned, Trends, and UNEP. And on this particularly interesting topic. As I think we all are very well aware, in the last however many years, there's been an explosion in the availability of alternative sources of data and information. And the question is, how can we pick through these different sources to identify the ones that are really meaningful for monitoring sustainable development? And in this session, we're going to look specifically at citizen data, citizen-generated data, and citizen science. So the systematic process of using insights gathered by people in order to understand sustainable development outcomes, and how we can use that data specifically and integrate it into official statistics and international statistics, so it can actually help with SDG monitoring. So I'm going to just quickly walk you through our speakers today. We've got an amazing lineup, and I won't be able to do justice to all of their bios, but I'll just give you a quick overview of where they all come from, in no particular order. First up, we've got Steve McFeely. Steve, feel free to wave. Steve is with UNCTAD and is the head of statistics and information. He's also an adjunct professor at the Centre for Policy Studies at the University College Cork in Ireland, and a deputy director of the IIASA International Statistical Literacy Programme. Steve chairs many processes and is very involved in everything to do with the global statistical system. But one thing that's particularly interesting is he was co-lead of the data strategy of the Secretary General for Action for Everyone Everywhere 2020 report, and holds the pen on a lot of useful processes and documents that have been going on within the UN in recent years. Next up, we have Gillian Campbell. Gillian, do give us a wave. Gillian is with the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, where she's responsible for monitoring post-2020 global biodiversity framework, including national action planning. Prior to that, she was the chief statistician at UNEP, and has done a lot in the citizen science world and trying to use it for environmental statistics and monitoring. So look forward to hearing from Gillian. Next, we have Omar Saidu. Omar's from the Ghanaian Statistical Service. Omar's a social statistician with over 20 years experience in data collection, analysis, and so on. He's extensive expertise in survey sampling, and was also a statistics instructor, a fellow of the sampling program for survey statisticians, and a member of the IIASA SDGs, which, for those of you who don't understand our crazy acronyms, is the interagency and expert group for SDG monitoring. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's a very, very important group helping to figure out how we monitor the SDGs. Finally, we have two more speakers. We're joined by Camden Howitt from Sustainable Coastlines. Camden's the co-founder and program director of the award-winning New Zealand NGO Sustainable Coastlines, which we're going to hear a lot more about today, which is a really exciting initiative showing how citizen science can really be used in practice. He's also an Edmund Hillary Fellow, and has been very active in the NGO space on community and environmental programs for the last 12 or so years. And then finally, we have Dilek. Dilek Frazel is from IIASA, where she's a research scholar at the Centre for Earth Observation and Citizen Science, which is a part of IIASA, the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. Dilek also chairs the European Commission-funded We Observe SDGs and Citizen Science Community of Practice, which aims to foster improved knowledge and collaboration around the contribution of citizen science to the SDGs. So the topic of our discussion today is very much Dilek's bread and butter, and I'm sure that she will have lots of insights to share with us all. So that's our amazing panelists. We have an hour and 15 minutes, so we're going to have to be quite quick with our initial presentations because I really want to get into a discussion. To which end, I really invite all of you to keep your questions coming. Whenever anything occurs to you, please pop it into the questions and answers section on Attendify, and we will be collecting those up and we will try and get to as many of your questions as we possibly can. So we're going to kick off our discussion now with Dilek, who's going to give us a short presentation, and then we will go through the rest of our speakers. Thanks very much. Over to you, Dilek.
Thank you, Jess, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. In the last 2 years, I've been working on how citizen science could contribute to the SDGs and how we can realize this untapped potential for achieving the SDGs. So I've been doing this with many colleagues from around the world through a community of practice I'm chairing as part of a European Commission-funded project called We Observe. So We Observe SDGs and Citizen Science Community of Practice, or the SDG scope, brings together the citizen science practitioners, researchers, representatives from the NSOs and the UN agencies, and everyone that is interested in leveraging citizen science for SDG monitoring particularly. So feel free to join us by registering on our website, as you can see on this slide. So we recently published a scientific paper in the journal Sustainability Science on our research. So with this research, we aim to identify where and how exactly citizen science data could contribute to SDG monitoring. So I would like to talk about the findings of this research briefly today after I describe what we mean by the term citizen science. Next slide, please. So citizen science is the voluntary public participation in scientific research and knowledge production, very briefly defined. So this participation can happen in various ways that include the activities where volunteers are involved in data collection only, or the activities where they identify research questions or design the whole research together with the scientists. So we have an inclusive way of defining the term citizen science, which includes activities you may know as citizen-generated data, crowdsourcing, community-based monitoring, and many others. So next slide, please. So you see some of the results of our research on this slide. Sorry that it's a little bit crowded, but I will explain what it means to you. For example, what you can see here, that citizen science data are already contributing or could contribute to all 17 SDGs by providing data at least to one indicator under each goal. So another important result from our research was that citizen science could contribute to the monitoring of 33% of the SDG indicators. And it actually contributes to the monitoring of 5 SDG indicators, such as the ones on protected areas, 2 indicators in there, and then another indicator on marine litter. But Gillian and Camden will talk more about that after me. So these are the ones that are green boxes on this slide. We also identified that there are 76 indicators that could benefit from citizen science data, and these are the yellow ones. And they cover indicators from water quality monitoring to sexual and physical violence. What I would like to highlight is that all these results are based on existing and recent past citizen science initiatives. So realizing their potential for SDG monitoring would be about bringing existing initiatives and the key stakeholders together rather than setting up completely new initiatives. We also found that the greatest contribution from citizen science to SDG monitoring would be in SDG 15, which is life on land, SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, SDG 3, health, and SDG 6, water. So additionally, the important thing is that the 93 environmental SDG indicators identified by UNEP would benefit from the citizen science data the most. And these are the indicators that the country is struggling a lot to monitor progress on actually. So just one example from our work. I will very briefly talk about PicturePile. This is a generic and flexible tool for ingesting imagery that can be rapidly classified by volunteers. So these images can be very high resolution satellite images, for example. And examples of using PicturePile for SDG monitoring purposes could be for mapping poverty for some indicators under SDG 1, human settlements and post-disaster damage assessment indicators under SDG 11, ecosystem health for SDG 6 and a few other SDGs, and agriculture area or cropland under SDG 2, and marine litter under SDG 14, and deforestation under SDG 15, and some other areas as well. So all the initiatives and tools we identified with potential as part of this research could be downloaded as a supplementary material with our paper, because there's no way that I can talk more about them here with these short remarks. But I would encourage the audience to download that paper and the table with it, especially the representatives of the NSOs, and look at the indicators where they collect data based on their priorities and see which citizen science initiatives could contribute data to those indicators. And then they could contact either the representatives of these initiatives or us, and we will be happy to support them and provide guidance on this. So as the next step, we're currently working with the Ghana Statistical Service and SDSN trends, along with UNEP, CBD, FAO, and Earth Challenge, to pilot the results of this research for a few indicators identified by Ghana based on their data needs. But Omar will give more insights on that, I guess, after me. And we plan to produce the results as use cases and as a guideline for the other NSOs that would be interested in using citizen science approaches for their SDG monitoring purposes. So just some final remarks. Citizen science, like other new sources of data, is not there to replace the traditional sources of data, but it could complement them through providing direct or supplementary contribution. So what we are suggesting here is that if we want to achieve the SDGs by 2030, we need to be able to measure our progress towards them more efficiently and in a more cost-effective way. So therefore, we urgently need to harness the potential of citizen science data like other new sources of data. So finally, I would like to say that we shouldn't see citizen science only as a source of data, but as a way to support mobilizing action for and raise awareness on the SDGs as well, which is extremely important. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dilek, for those great and very speedy remarks. You were very good at keeping to time. Dilek, before you disappear, just one quick question. I just wonder whether you could give us an example. You referred to the Ghana project, which we'll hear about from Omar, but are there any other projects that you've researched that have really you found really inspirational, that are really tangible examples of citizen science supporting SDG monitoring?
Sure. There are many examples, but I could give another one about water quality, for instance. The indicator 6.3.2 is about water quality, and this indicator aims to measure the proportion of water bodies in a country with good water quality. There is a methodology exists for this indicator, but data are not regularly produced because great substantial investments in financial and human resources are needed for this. And many of the countries are lacking data because of that. But there are citizen science initiatives, the good news, such as Freshwater Watch, for instance. They could provide meaningful contributions to monitoring of this indicator. Freshwater Watch, for instance, has a global water quality database based on the contributions made by more than 8,000 citizen scientists. Wow. And many water bodies, yeah. And this is a field where citizen science is already quite present already. So I could give many other examples, but I would actually like to keep it short and again mention that all these examples and initiatives could be downloaded with our paper as a supplementary material. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dilek. Nice to sort of hear a tangible example to help bring this all alive. So next we're going to turn to Gillian. Gillian has just got tremendous experience working on trying to systematize citizen science approaches for monitoring of the SDGs in her former role at UNEP and currently with CBD. So Gillian, over to you for your remarks. Thanks.
Thank you. So I would like to say, I mean, when I started working at UNEP, or when I started working even in the field of environment statistics, I didn't come at it because I had this interest in citizen science. I didn't actually even know what citizen science really was. I was struggling with this challenge that's on the slide, which is that we couldn't measure the environmental dimension of the SDGs. We couldn't measure it at the global level. You know, there was 68% of the related indicators that we'd set out that we couldn't measure at the global level. And then if you go to certain countries, small island developing states and other least developed countries, these data gaps were even more pronounced. And then if you tried to go into local level monitoring, which is where you really need to have information to make environmental interventions, you had almost no information, or the information was simply so out of date that there was no way to use it. And so citizen science, to me, was a way that we could start filling these gaps. You have an interested group of people who are going out and going bird watching on a regular basis. And so you'll hear from Omar later, but maybe you have the government who's able to do a benchmarking study on a certain population or on something like beach litter, which is what we're going to talk about. But there's no way that the government can feasibly monitor something that is happening everywhere in the whole country or across a big stretch of area on a regular basis. It's too expensive, it takes too much human resources. And so the way that we could fill these data gaps and the way that we could fill, both the spatial and the temporal frequency is to use data that's being collected by citizens and by apps. And so to me, we really just don't have a way to measure the environment without bringing citizen science in and without using all the data and all the options that we can, whether it's satellite data or citizen science data or looking to new IoT devices. If we don't try to bring everything together, then we're never going to be able to create a data ecosystem that actually allows us to understand our planet. And in my job now, if you look at what we're discussing on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, we're not in a good situation in terms of biodiversity. We've pretty much completely failed in terms of achieving the last set of biodiversity goals. We are failing in terms of a lot of the climate change commitments that have been made. And so I think that if we can't get a better handle on the situation, and if we can't measure and figure out how to target our interventions and which interventions work, then we have no chance of achieving the sustainable future. Next slide. So this is really why we are trying to bring people in. And I want to highlight that, even if we can measure the SDGs, so these are the types of SDG indicators that exist, a lot of these indicators really relate to environmental policy. And so as I was saying, for me, it is about achieving the SDGs, but it's really about achieving what's behind the SDGs. And we're sort of on a path here to how do we measure the environmental dimension of development. And as a lot of you know, I'm guessing from the type of people who attend the World Data Forum, the SDGs were determined not only on what does the world actually want to measure, or the SDG indicators were not only a list of what the world really wants to measure, but they also did include an element of feasibility. Were we actually going to be able to measure it within the next decade? And so this is why for the environmental dimension of development, you see so many indicators related to enabling mechanisms, things related to different types of policy, or overseas development assistance, those sorts of indicators, as opposed to indicators related to the environment, state, and trend, and people in the environment. And those two, environment, state, and trend, and people in the environment, are really the highest possibility for citizen science contributions. And I would think that at the end of this, we might want to see a switch in terms of how we measure development, so that we're having more and more indicators actually, or better indices, maybe where we're combining indicators related to the environmental state and trend and people in the environment. And we need engagement from citizens, and we need lots and lots of different types of data in order to do this. Thank you. Handing back to you, Jess.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dillian, for those brilliant remarks, and for your also kind of call to action, I should say, for all of these different data communities to come forward and support. Quickly, I mean, this is probably quite a big question, Dillian, and maybe we can come back to it in the discussion, but I'd be really interested to know how citizen science is going to be used to monitor the conventional biological diversity moving forward. What do you how do you imagine it could be helpful?
So I would say biodiversity is probably one of the areas where we have the greatest potential for using citizen science. There's the GBIF, which is the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And this is already contributing to a lot of our understanding in terms of extinctions, bird populations, frog populations, different types of populations. And this kind of information already is included in the identification of key biodiversity areas in SDG 15. And so at the CBD, we're looking to really expand this to better understand different populations and see how we can create indices that combine information across species so that we can get a better assessment of ecosystem and species health. And I would want to say here that a lot of this experience, though, is really, as I said, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility is a global level organization. I think the big push right now, and we'll hear more from Omar and Camden, is how do we make sure that this is nationalized information? We work with national institutions and we make sure that, or we try to promote the use of this in national statistical offices, because I think that that's how we're actually going to see a change in how this information is used for policy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gillian. And yeah, I hope we can have time to come back to that in our discussion. Next, we're going to go to Camden. As we've already mentioned, Camden works with sustainable coastlines in New Zealand. And I think this is going to be a brilliant insight into a sort of a program currently running, generating so much useful information, and how we can connect that to official processes for monitoring. So Camden, over to you.
Thank you, Jessica, for the introduction. And yes, I'm representing a charity based in New Zealand called Sustainable Coastline. So we have over 12 years working community engagement and capacity development around New Zealand and the Pacific Islands. And similar to what Gillian said, we initially didn't really know what citizen science was, nor necessarily how it could help us solve the issues that we were fighting. We were seeing marine litter, heavily affecting a lot of the communities that we worked in. But outside of beach cleanups, those communities were not really able to inform the decisions that were then impacting the problem in their community, and therefore, helping them to solve that issue. So we looked at a program alongside three major government agencies here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We worked with Statistics New Zealand, our NSO, National Statistics Office, the Ministry for the Environment, who provided funding for the program, and the Department of Conservation, who we worked with on the scientific methodology alongside this program. So that was really, really, really critical in terms of designing something that had initial buy-in. I suppose if there's only one key learning that you take from this, is that working with that NSO, with Stats NZ, in the design phase of this program, litter intelligence was absolutely critical, because you get buy-in to using the data for environmental reporting. And in our case, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Stats NZ and Ministry for the Environment lead our official environmental reporting series, and therefore had buy-in to the data that were collected by citizen scientists, because they were part of it right from the beginning. Next slide, please. So what we came up with was a program called Litter Intelligence. This is really about inspiring and informing better decisions for a world without litter. The program is based on a citizen science program, and that's used to collect long-term and scientifically rigorous litter data. Now, initially, we've started with beach cast litter, and we're using a localized adaptation of the UNEP IOC marine litter guidelines, but we're also about to launch a freshwater and then a stormwater citizen science litter data monitoring program. And that's going to help us build a much more holistic view of what those issues are, and engage more citizen scientists in being able to input into these monitoring programs, and then therefore the official environmental reporting programs that our government has. It is now already New Zealand's first national litter database, and we're covering around 170 beaches so far in New Zealand, and then there's one in Samoa that we've set up alongside SPREP, Secretariat for the Pacific Regional Environment Program. As Gillian was mentioning, this is a great way to cover those data gaps that governments have in terms of the frequency that the sites can be surveyed, because we're looking at 170 beaches surveyed every 3 months. So we have over 500 surveys coming into date, and really that data quality is absolutely critical. So we've built technology alongside this that allows a lot of the quality assurance measures to be covered off. Also allows a lot of insight into that data, the visualizations, interactivity and all that sort of stuff. We really want those communities who are involved in the collection of the data to then be able to interact with it, use it, download it, lobby with it, advocate with it, create programs within their own communities, and then to back that up, we've got a schools program where the school students themselves are citizen scientists, and they're very much involved in science learning, learning by inquiry, but also connecting with nature, getting out to their local beach and understanding what those litter issues are, and then using the data, becoming data literate, and using that in their own projects. For example, getting hold of local media institutions, creating artworks, and using it for science and statistical projects. Next slide, please. So, as I said, one of the absolutely key parts of this is building technology that can support the citizen scientists, can engage the citizen scientists, and then can allow that open, transparent, and free access to the data. And so we've already seen some really, really cool results come from that, not just in the communities themselves, but then more broadly with the data being used for the reporting. So we have a web app that's accessible on mobile or any device, and then we have a website, so litterintelligence.org. So I encourage you all to have a look at that and engage with the data, filter it, make comparisons and things like that, because this is what our citizen scientists do, but it's also what our politicians do and our government agencies do. So a few wins to date. We've had in the middle of last year, our New Zealand's first voluntary national review of the SDGs featured this program. We had our marine environment, which is a report released in October last year, part of our official government reporting series. And that was the very first time that citizen science data had been used in the official environmental reporting series for our government. It was also the very first time marine litter had been reported by our government. And so those are huge wins for citizen science, huge wins for the issue that we're facing as well. The project also featured in the paper mapping citizen science contributions to the UN Sustainable Development Goals that Dilek was mentioning earlier on, and has been used in consultation documents for plastics policy consultation and reports by the Office of the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor since. So, some really, really big wins for citizen science, some really, really big wins for the communities that they're in and the issues that we're facing. So look forward to talking about this further on the panel.
Camden, thank you so much. Just quickly, tell me the project that you're currently running and the litter intelligence project that you're operating, is that only happening in New Zealand, or do you have plans to take it to other countries?
Currently only happening in New Zealand. We have a site that I mentioned that we've worked with SPREP in Samoa. So there's very much no geographical limitation to the program. I mean, as with all of these projects, there's a funding gap in the sense that we need to provide training. What the key here is it's not just a tech tool, it's not just an app, because we figure that community engagement with citizen science is absolutely critical. So just sending someone an app is really not doing that job of engaging communities really, really well. So what we want to do is build a program where local leaders can be delivered that training by us, but then lead that locally within whatever country there is a gap for that data.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine. And I think the other thing that you referred to at the beginning, which is absolutely crucial, of course, is making sure that anywhere you work, you've got really strong connections to the National Statistical Office, given the sort of fundamental role that they play in brokering this and fostering trust and so on. So that's a really nice connection now to Omar's presentation. So Omar is from the Ghanaian National Statistics Office. Omar, over to you. It would be great to hear from the perspective of a government actor, your experience of working with citizen-generated data for SDG monitoring.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'm happy to be part of this program. Following our data roadmap forum in April 2017, where we tried to assess our capacity as a country for monitoring the SDGs, we realized that as a National Statistical Office with a mandate of coordinating the national statistical system, we are unable to use our official statistics system in the country to monitor the SDGs appropriately. Secondly, we also realized that in the spirit of leaving no one behind, a lot of the data we compile as a national statistical system largely come from sample surveys, limited data from administrative data, and the decennial censuses. So we are unable to actually identify areas where some interventions are required to appropriately address some specific SDGs. So as part of that, we started a process of exploring the use of non-traditional data sources to complement the official statistics system in understanding and better targeting interventions. So one of such projects is our initiative of using citizens generated data approaches to collect data on gender-based violence and on waste management. So we started engaging with stakeholders, even within the National Statistical Office, to get buy-in and then eventually roll out such a program. So we started looking at 5 specific SDG indicators that we thought using citizen-generated data could complement the traditional survey data. So we engaged widely and then decided to develop mobile applications for the implementation of these. So we engaged with technology firms that have the know-how in developing these applications. But what we have tried to do is to engage with the citizens right from the beginning and engaging with the local government authorities who would have the responsibility of implementing these also from the beginning. So as we speak now, we have developed 2 applications that are ready to go out sometime next week. We've already done the pilot testing in the communities where we're going to pilot this. We've gotten some very useful feedback that have helped us. One, the Let's Talk app, which is purely going to be used to measure 4 gender-based violence SDG indicators, and the Clean Up Ghana, which is the app for collecting data on waste management. Whilst we collect the data on waste management, the app will also be used to help solve the the waste problem in the municipalities. So the local authority are very much looking forward to the launch of this next week. And these are how we engaging the citizens in collecting data for monitoring the SDGs at that level. Next slide, please. We also realized through our process that there are some SDGs goals that we are lacking behind in terms of our data systems, especially around goals 14 and goals 15. Our statistical system in the country basically does not produce the kind of data we need to monitor these. So we started engagement with International Institute for Applied Science Systems Analysis and Trends and others to see how we can leverage citizen science methodologies to monitor some specific SDG indicators. As also working with the line ministries who have the mandate around these indicators, we agree that it will be appropriate to monitor SDG indicator 14.1.1b and then 15.4.2 using citizen science methodologies. So we are at the moment work with the stakeholders involved. We have identified the areas that we're working in, and there's a general buy-in across the National Statistical System, especially within the National Statistical Office, to pilot this. And once we're able to pilot these and we see that they are very useful, then we can scale up to cover the entire country, and especially areas that our traditional data systems are unable to provide us the needed data. Next slide, please. So largely, we see that this provides a great opportunity for national statistical offices. And so in reviewing our national statistical law in 2019, we gave the greater mandate to the National Statistical Office to explore the use of non-traditional data sources to augment our official statistics and system. We are also at the same time working on data quality assurance framework, because obviously these cannot come in to replace our traditional data systems, but there should be a way of quality assuring these data as we begin to bring them into the fold of official statistics. And we realize that once we are able to proactively do this, it will be able to help the national statistical system to get the necessary resources from the political leaders in the country to implement quite a number of things. And this is coming from some work we did around mobility analysis using telecom data during the COVID period. We realized that that helped us a lot in getting space for the National Statistical Office to sit in the National COVID-19 technical team. And we believe that if we had not proactively done this, we probably would not have had the opportunity of being in this. So we think that the system we are setting up are very important and in ensuring that national statistical offices are able to live up to the expectation of being able to adequately and effectively coordinate the national statistical system to produce the needed data for monitoring the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Omar, for those brilliant remarks, and so great to see Ghana sort of leading the charge or leading the way amongst the international statistical community to try and make a really conducive environment for broader forms of monitoring, including citizen science. I mean, Omar, you just touched on this. I mean, I think one of the concerns that quite a few countries have is that there isn't necessarily the quality control with citizen science approaches that you might need in order to integrate that data into official statistics. How do you kind of overcome that within Ghana? You mentioned your quality assurance frameworks. Any other sort of tips for other national statistical offices?
Yeah, I think that is a very valid concern, and coming from statistics, national statistical offices, quality is one of the key things that we always look out for. But we also realize that until you build and you continue to revolve around something, you are not able to identify all the issues around it. So for instance, a maker of a car, until you have the car, you will not be able to test all the things around the car. And so with this, our belief is that once we have started this, there are some that are obvious that we need to start working on. And those that are obvious, that are already been tested elsewhere, in terms of quality, we bring in those ones. But there are others that we may not be able to identify at these early stages, but it's very important that, and then we continuously improve on it. And so the quality assurance framework we are developing is one of the things that we're seeking to use to identify some areas that we need to pay attention to in terms of quality of these processes.
Thank you so much, Omar. And I like your analogy. You're absolutely right. You know, until you actually start bringing these types of data into the official statistics arena, you're never really going to understand how useful it can or, you know, may not be, and its many sort of benefits and deficiencies and so on. So we all need to open the door and experiment that way, as you said with your car analogy. So great. Thank you so much, Omar. Lovely to hear from you. Finally, our final speaker is Steve. And with Steve's remarks, we're going to kind of jump back out from the national level and go back up to thinking about what the implications of all this are within the global kind of monitoring framework for the SDGs and within the global statistical system. So Stephen, do you want to turn your camera on? Fabulous, we can now see you. Just before you start, a quick reminder to everyone who's listening in, we'd really love your comments and questions. Please do put them in the Q&A box on Attendify, and we are putting them together, and we will be addressing some of your questions in the ensuing discussion. Thanks, so over to you, Stephen.
Great, thanks, Jessica, and hello, everybody. Welcome to the World Data Forum. So my talk fits very neatly from what you've heard so far. So what I'd like to do is turn our attention back for a second, though, to the last World Data Forum. And at the end of the forum in the Dubai Declaration, we agreed that the data demands for the 2030 agenda required new solutions. And we needed to leverage the power of new data sources and technologies, develop partnerships between NSIs and private sector, civil society, academia, and of course, we should have said citizen science as well. And really after that, myself and a colleague, Boyan Nastav, who wrote the paper that this talk feeds out of, we really wondered, how do we do that? So, okay, that's the aspiration. So what's the mechanism that allows us to actually realize this ambition? So next slide, please. So just before we get to the proposed solution, just to look at the situation from the IIAG perspective. So you can see on the left-hand side, back when the the indicators were first posed, only 35% of the SDG indicators were tier 1, meaning that we really understood what we were talking about conceptually, and we had enough data to construct a global indicator. You can see now, coming up towards 5 years later, that there's been massive progress, and now that 53% of indicators are tier 1. The tier 3 indicators have more or less disappeared. But nevertheless, what it still means, though, is effectively half of the indicators that were required to compile and populate for SDG purposes are not populated yet, and we've less than 10 years left. And that's the other kind of thought process that feeds into our paper. So we have this urgency that we've identified at the last World Data Forum, and now you see it kind of quantified. This is why it's so urgent. There's a lot of indicators to be populated. So next slide, please. So both Camden and Omar have presented different mechanisms at a national level in ways. So Camden talked about dealing with the NSO right from the beginning. Omar has talked kind of about also a more formal process where you look at quality assurance, you look at the legal infrastructure to make sure that you can use these type of data. And what we've done in a way is kind of formalize this approach. So on the left-hand side, we note that NSOs typically use unofficial data all the time. What we're really saying, in addition to using these unofficial data, they could use unofficial statistics. So the distinction that we're drawing here is not just raw data, but also data that have been put through a statistical process. So in other words, indicators. And those indicators could be accredited or certified either at a national level. So in other words, Omar in the Ghanese Statistics Office could somehow formally certify, which in effect is what they're doing, but maybe just not in a formal sense. Or it could also be done at a global level, either by a UN agency or by the IIAG SDGs. So statistics could be formally accredited, and this would massively expand the pool of data that's available and the pool of statistics that could then feed into the SDG process. And we heard Gillian saying in terms of environmental and biodiversity, she was saying really she can't see how you would populate all of these indicators without recourse to citizen science. And in effect, we're agreeing, but we're saying not just citizen science. There could also be other data from private sector, from academia. So what we want to do is set up a process where we could look at all of these data and formally accredit them. And I think this speaks to the point that Omar was making. The system has to be dynamic. So you can't set out a quality assurance framework right at the start. You need some sort of a peer review mechanism that's adaptable and that can take on board different data in different situations at different times. And that's really what the accreditation or certification board would do. And with that, that's it. It's a very simple idea, and I hope you find it interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Super interesting and great to see that there's been some really sort of systematic thinking about how to recognise the useful role of citizen science and as you said, accredit it within these processes. One question for you before we open up to the rest of the panel is just, do you think that with these sort of, say you have a data set that is accredited by an international entity and then feeds into official monitoring, is there a bit of a risk of kind of sidestepping the NSO of this, not necessarily being controlled by them? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, there is. And in fact, we draw attention to this in the paper. And I think we need to make a distinction between a global indicator and a national indicator. So at the global level, I think it's appropriate that an international organization could decide to use citizen science or other big data, for example. So you could use satellite information or something. But there's always the risk, and we've seen it at the SDG processes, that countries will object and they say, no, you have to use our national level data. And while that's understandable, and it makes perfect sense at a national level, there is this tension. So I think this is one of the issues that we highlight in the paper that needs to be discussed. If the kind of global statistical system needs to progress, and really start harnessing these new types of data, this issue needs to be addressed, and we need to figure out some mechanism where international organizations aren't stymied all the time because one or two countries object that they don't want this data used. So they absolutely need to be consulted, but they need to be consulted before they see individual results and start objecting to the fact that they just don't like the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. A really good point. And I mean, I think we saw that with the case of some of the data that was coming out of Brazil earlier this year and so on, you know, not to name names, but that was a pretty glaring example of, you know, where the official statistics contradicted what the executive office wanted to see. They attempted to sort of shut it down. So agreeing these processes and getting buy-in to the processes in advance seemed to make a lot of sense before you then start going into specific data sets, given changing politics in every country in the world. Brilliant. Okay, can I ask all of my speakers to turn their videos back on? Brilliant. Great to see you all now, Camden. Fabulous. So welcome back, everyone. We're now going to go into our discussion portion of this event. Huge thanks to everyone who's been sending questions in via Attendify. Do please keep them coming. We've had some really interesting questions for our panelists, and we're going to try and respond to as many as we can now. So I obviously had lots of questions for you myself as well, but I'm going to hold off asking those until we have responded to some of the ones from the floor. So a first really interesting question to take a bit of a technological approach to citizen science is, you know, could the panel comment on how we can develop and fund global IT systems for citizen science projects to support the SDGs? Think of common systems like PowerPoint or Word or Zoom, etc. Are there mechanisms that we could create using technology that would be useful for all citizen scientists as they try and, you know, compile their own data and systematize it and so on? So an interesting idea, and you know, perhaps sounds a bit simplistic, but then again, when they first came up with the idea of MS Word, I'm sure people thought that that was quite simplistic. So you never know what has the power to take off. So I don't know who wants to address that technological question first. Maybe I'll come to you, Gillian, and see what you think.
So I think, I mean, there are a lot of different types of data that are being collected through citizen science. And so it might be a little bit difficult to have one common app, but with cell phone apps, I mean, really, I think that this is the future of citizen science. I mean, for whether it is being measured, whether we're talking about marine plastics, whether we're talking about species, whether we're talking about any number of things, you have your phone with you pretty much all the time. You can enter data anywhere. You can connect to data systems anywhere. And I know there are a number of different organizations. IIASA is one of them. The Wilson Center is one of them that are looking to develop applications that could collect data in this way. And then there is this idea of building sort of a global citizen science data architecture, which would connect all the apps. And so I'm not sure, I mean, I think that, you know, individual projects might still want to develop their own apps, but connecting those apps then could provide a home for all of this data. And so it's not maybe as simple as what was suggested with Microsoft PowerPoint, but I definitely think we could connect a lot of data by pulling apps together into a common data architecture.
Great, thanks, Gillian. Related to that and sort of thinking about sharing technologies and platforms and tools, Camden, there's someone on the line who's clearly an ardent admirer of your work and has said, brilliant program, how can I franchise it for my country? So Camden, how, you know, what tools, resources, skills, etc. do you think would be required in order to mimic what you're doing in other places around the world?
Yeah, really good question. Thanks for that. I think, as I sort of mentioned before, the key is getting that internal buy-in from the NSO. We're not here to do pop science. We're here to do really, really high quality science that is then used for informing the SDGs, informing you know, national level or obviously there's a function on franchising and making sure that the right meetings can be had with the right people around the NSOs. But I think technologically, the solution that we have currently is not geographically limited whatsoever. So in terms of franchising, I'm absolutely open to talk to anyone that wants to get in touch. And I think our contact details are on Attendify there.
Brilliant. Yes, please do look. I think all of the speakers have their contact details on Attendify. So if you're interested in emailing us, do take a look at our profiles and you're welcome to get in touch. Stephen, I'm going to jump to you next, if you don't mind. And just, you know, we talked a lot about the role of NGOs and sort of implied, referred to at least, you know, tangentially academia and so on. What about the role of the private sector in all of this? You know, do you think that different private companies and so on could have a useful role in supporting citizen science and citizen generated data activities?
Yes, I do. I hope they take up the offer, because conversely, we also see private sector sometimes objecting if the UN is developing a tool, and the objection is often from the kind of ideological perspective that, you know, private enterprise shouldn't be crowded out, which is valid. But I think if that argument is made, then that's fine. But I think then they have to step up and say, well, okay, if you don't want to be crowded out, then you need to get involved. So again, you have another interesting tension between developing a global public good in a way that can be useful to citizen science, but isn't prohibitive and isn't proprietary. So, you know, the data aren't proprietary and the cost isn't too exorbitant that people can't use it.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you, Stephen. Dilek, another question's come in that I think you'd be really well positioned to think about or respond to, which is, do we often see, and forgive me, whoever asked this question, I'm slightly paraphrasing your message, but do we often see tensions between how citizen-based citizen groups come up with definitions of SDG indicators versus, for example, the potential meaning in the indicator? So what I mean here is, say the indicator SDG 11.2.1 around convenience in access to public transport. There's quite a lot of open room for interpretation in that, right? What does convenience to public transport mean? Is it access via an asphalt road, or is it walking distance, or whatever? And how do we make sure that groups who are doing local monitoring of these indicators are all using similar definitions, standards, and that, you know, those kind of standards are clear for everyone?
So thank you for the question. So all indicators come with metadata, right? So we can read what these terms mean, what the concepts are, what are the suggested sources of data are, and how this could be collected, and all these things like that. So I think the first thing should be, of course, to understand this metadata and the global methodology available for that, and then based on that, basically work on like gearing our citizen science initiatives towards monitoring those particular things. So in the specific of this indicator, I cannot really give so much insights because this is not my area of expertise, but this is like the general thing to do, like looking at the global metadata, because there's everything written, everything is detailed, and based on that, basically work with the National Statistical Office or try to understand and basically move our initiatives towards that direction.
Brilliant, absolutely. So yes, exactly, making sure that all of the different citizen science groups are making sure that they fully publish their metadata and all their processes and so on, so that we can then sort of understand it and help to make it standardized for national, international reporting. Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Fabulous, thank you, Dilek. Omar, a question for you around the litter program that you're kicking off or have started in Ghana. Someone's asked, you know, really at the really granular level, when you're literally counting waste, are you differentiating between plastic litter, food waste, organics, and so on? Is there that level of differentiation in the program, so you can really see the types of waste and how sustainable or not they are and so on?
Yes, so that is the idea, because whilst we are yet to go to the field, but that is exactly what we're planning to do. Currently, it's a national program that we are embarking on and encouraging the general population to disaggregate, to segregate waste. And so because, and we're trying to set up systems that will also identify how much waste is generated, the type of waste, and so that can be connected to industry. And so if you don't do that, you cannot easily connect it to those who need that waste as a raw material to feed into some production. And so that is something that we're going to be doing.
Brilliant. That's really great to hear, and to understand that, we're not just counting waste for an aggregate total, but to say, if there's X amount of plastic being produced, who are the plastic providers in Ghana, or what are the imports, exports that might be bringing this ashore, and how do you tackle the bigger problem? So really interesting. Thank you. I'm going to slightly pivot now, because one of the other things we wanted to talk about in this session today was about how we can use citizen science to help monitor epidemics and particularly the crisis we face now, so COVID-19. And I'd love to just go to each of the panelists in turn to understand, maybe starting with Camden, so we can start with a specific project. How has the COVID-19 epidemic affected your work? I mean, has it affected your ability to do your beach cleanups and your counts and so on? So yeah, any thoughts from you, Camden?
Yeah, well, significantly, all of our operations in the field were halted for at least 2 months in New Zealand's first widespread lockdown. Immediately, we turned to technology and to calls like these, virtual trainings, a lot of remote support for our citizen scientists, the ones that could get out to the beach, the ones that could walk down in small self-isolated groups. But to be honest, for our highest level of lockdown, we wanted to halt all survey work because of the fact that COVID could survive on plastic surfaces, and we didn't know whether the litter that had been dropped had been handled by someone with the virus. So we put a halt to that. When we came into a lower level of lockdown, we then encouraged our citizen scientists to go out there with the appropriate self-isolation and distancing rules, but supported them as much as we could remotely. I think it was a really good opportunity for us to connect and start getting the conversation moving around how we would train and support groups remotely long term, which saves us on carbon driving and flying around the country. And it's a great thing to do for the longevity of the program as well.
That's nice to hear, Camden, that you've managed to sort of make to some degree, drive forward some progress in spite of the challenges that we're facing right now. Omar, I'd love to hear from the cases from Ghana. I know your audit program hasn't started yet, but in general, how has it affected the operations of the Ghanaian Statistical Service and your work with these different communities? Has it been, challenging to progress in this particular time?
Obviously, COVID has come in with its own challenges, and I bet you if somebody had asked me a couple of months back before COVID, how efficient are you able to work at home, I would have said no, working from home would not be very efficient. But today, sometimes I tell colleagues that I'm able to do much more at home than when I'm in the office. And partly we realized that once COVID started, for instance, the Citizen-Generated Data Project, we have started a process of identifying the technology firms that would need to develop the apps. We're using the design thinking approach, so we started with the first understanding the problem, then COVID started. But we moved the rest of the processes virtually. Mm-hmm. And we have been able to complete all the processes working virtually till we recently had to go to a field to do the testing. And I'm sure if we had opportunity, we probably wouldn't have done that. One, it has saved us some costs because we have moved things virtually. Secondly, we have learned a lot in working virtually, so that working with the different regions of the country, now we know that there are certain things that people don't need to be physically together to achieve that. They need to move and then use technology to achieve this. Besides that, we've also evolved and introduced new dimensions to the way we work. And for me, yes, COVID in health-wise, it has not helped us, but in terms of efficiency of our processes, yes, somehow we have really done very well.
That's, again, really inspiring and nice to hear, Omar. And I imagine, thinking about different ways of connecting, particularly in parts of the world where accessibility across countries is quite challenging. I used to live in Liberia, and getting across Liberia is slower than it is to, probably go to Sierra Leone. So, I think looking at different ways of using digital connectivity to try and move these programs forward is brilliant. Dilek, I want to come to you now to sort of not think about the day-to-day operations so much as just what's the potential for citizen science to help us monitor epidemics like COVID? Should we be turning to citizens to self-report and to contribute to the ways we're tracking, the disease?
Yeah, there are all sorts of initiatives that are looking into that. And I believe we all saw that citizen science could complement official data and responses about the pandemic during this process, right? I mean, it could help understand the disease dynamics a bit better. And also because of the fact that not everyone is seeking medical support when they experience symptoms for various reasons. And as you mentioned, that then self-reporting could come in as a very valuable resource. And even when they do, sometimes they do not have access to testing or health services, but we need that real-time data for capturing all those things in order to be able to understand the true impact of the pandemic, right? So citizen science could really help complement traditional sources of data by providing information also on the current and future hotspots, and help us looking at the problem from a very different angle than the official data sources could look at, possibly, because it also provides the perspective of citizens based on their own experiences with the pandemic. So I can give you one example, maybe this Boston's Children's Hospital's COVID Near You project, or King's College London's COVID symptom tracker, or SafeCast, or many others that I cannot talk about here. But yeah, COVID Near You, for instance, is a symptom tracking platform, and people can basically report on the symptoms that they experience, and COVID-like we could also understand whether COVID-like illness exists in other places. So providing real-time information to inform these measures are important. So I think there's a lot that citizen science could offer, and we also understand it in terms of providing this depth and nuance to this information, traditional sources of information. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dilek. And as you're saying that, yes, I'm one of the 4.5 million people around the world who contributes to the King's College London COVID-19 symptom tracker, which I know has been really effective, particularly in the UK, for helping to monitor and look at the progression of different types of symptoms and so on. Apparently, one of the challenges with taking that kind of tracker to scale is in order to be franchised to other countries, it needs WHO support. Which hasn't necessarily been forthcoming. So I'd love to hear from you, Stephen and Gillian. Both of you work in the international statistical system in very senior positions. What do you think needs to be done to try and get the WHO and other international actors to really take some of these citizen science initiatives very seriously and build them into the official statistical processes? Maybe I'll start with you, Stephen.
Thanks, Jess. Well, I'm not going to comment on WHO policy. I'm not expert enough in the area to say anything. But I mean, I think the challenge that statisticians have faced all the time is, historically, one of our main focuses has been building time series. So it's consistency over time of a series. So the consequence of that sometimes is when a shock happens or something really kind of sudden, we're kind of slower to adapt, because we're trying to figure out conceptually, what does it mean? How does it integrate with existing concepts, existing standards and definitions? And while that might sound a bit cumbersome and a bit tedious, for statisticians, it's really important. So it takes time. And then it's back to the point that Omar made. I mean, quality assurance is a key factor, not just the quality of the data, but you have to be very careful, and it's an issue we've raised in the paper, always to look at what's the motive of the data provider, especially if they're an agency that's advocating for something. There can be a tendency to find a result that they want. So, these are things that we have to take seriously. But that said, I think the sessions like this, I think the statistical community needs to take citizen science much more seriously and figure out ways to embrace it. The problem is, it's not always the best time to do it right in the middle of a crisis, because you need to think carefully about these things. You marry in haste and repent at leisure.
Thanks, Stephen. Very good way of putting it. And yes, I think we're seeing this in lots of different sectors. You know, governments desperate to innovate and to try and monitor COVID or population movement or various other useful measures of the health epidemic or related measures. And the problem being that we don't really have the time to think through a lot of the protection and safety and data storage and use kind of aspects that are so fundamental. And if anyone's interested in this topic in particular, we at SDSN Trends have done a big project on contracts for public-private data sharing and how you actually make sure that there are sort of safe and effective, fair contracts in place before you embark on these partnerships. And there's examples there from groups like Julian's work at UNEP and so on, so quite related. Gillian, coming to you now, I mean, someone actually put this in the chat as well as a question. This all seems that, you know, we need a lot more international cooperation, right? If this is going to become something that all governments, all agencies are really looking to as a tool in their SDG toolbox or repertoire. What do you think we can do in order to better promote kind of cooperation between all the different actors in the global data ecosystem on citizen science?
I think here, you know, we do have, COVID is an opportunity. Obviously, it is a tremendous tragedy as well, but there's an opportunity here in that right now, I would say that more people are using statistics and more citizens are realizing how important it is that they engage. As you were saying, I think you said 4.5 million people are engaged in the Citizen Science Initiative in the UK. And what this means is that people are realizing that it's up to them to engage, and it's up to them to hold their government, and it's up to them to hold the international organizations accountable. And this is a shift from sort of the governments being seen as the ones that are providing and controlling the data to individual people saying, I have a stake in this and I want to be involved. And so I think that this is the time, because now you have more and more people saying, I want to understand the situation, I want to be involved, and I want to be able to take actions that affect my own life. And the second thing that I think is coming out of COVID is that right now you have a situation where people are seeing the relationship between these different sectors of development. Everyone knows that COVID is a zoonotic disease, or most people know now. And so they're saying, okay, wait a second, all of this environmental stuff and the social stuff is more connected than we realized. And this is an opportunity for us to really look at these things coherently. And so I do think, you know, as citizens and as people start to realize how we need to engage and how we need to work together, it provides an opportunity for us at the global level also to say, here's how we can meet this need. And so I think that there's a lot of interest in the global level, and I think there's a lot of different efforts to coordinate that are being established. And so I think it's just a matter of time.
Brilliant, thanks, Gillian. And yeah, I think you've touched something really interesting there, which is, you know, one of the advantages of citizen science is that you can use it to look at these interrelationships between, you know, health and environmental dimensions or whatever it might be, which can be a lot harder to monitor with our sort of more traditional sectorally based approaches. So yeah, super interesting there. One question I wanted to ask of all of you is around are there aspects, and actually, again, this is something that's come up in the Q&A, so thanks to whoever posted this question. Are there certain elements of the SDGs where citizen science is not so appropriate? You know, are there certain things where actually citizen science isn't the tool really that you should be looking towards, or certain SDGs in particular where you think that this is potentially less useful? Dilek, you did a mapping of all the different dimensions, you know, and you did highlight some were seem to have less coverage than others. What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you for the question. Yes, it is very interesting. So as you may remember, I showed a table while I was presenting our research results, and we identified, as I said, 33% of the SDG indicators could be supported by citizen science data. But there are many other indicators that citizen science approaches are not really good to monitor progress on. These could be, for instance, financial indicators that asks about, I don't know, financial aid on scholarships or other things, or there are these policy-related indicators that countries need to report on particularly. So those are not really amenable to citizen science approaches. As we were discussing now, the issues around, for instance, that are really affecting people's daily lives, such as COVID, such as environmental change, air quality, in all sorts of different things, that they really see the impact on their daily lives, are more amenable to citizen science approaches than other. This is what we identified in this research.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dilek. Anyone else? I see quite a few nodding heads from the panelists. Stephen, I think particularly, did you want to come in on this point?
Well, I agree with Dilek. I mean, I think on some of the more complex financial stuff, some of the economic indicators, it's maybe less appropriate because some of the concepts are more difficult. But that said, if you take something like inflation, I mean, it's maybe dragging NSOs out of their comfort zone and into a slightly more researchy type of thing. But where citizen science could contribute, though, is kind of measuring the perception difference between formally measured inflation, for example, and how people perceive it, because there's often quite a significant difference. And I think understanding those differences, it's an area that kind of economists haven't spent enough time actually trying to piece together. You know, generally inflation feels much higher than we report that it is. Why is that?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's areas that they're not appropriate, but there are areas too that we're maybe less comfortable, but it could lead to some really interesting findings.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Gillian, I saw that you wanted to comment on this as well. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to mention, I think Stephen highlighted this earlier also. In a lot of the indicators, citizen science is not going to be a replacement for traditional statistics, and it also is going to complement other sorts of data, whether it's satellite data or remote sensing. And so I want to just also really highlight that it's very important that we don't see citizen science as a way to get around funding traditional statistics. Obviously, we still need to put money towards NSOs. We still need to put money towards data collection. And sometimes you hear these comments from people, oh, we have so much data, all we have to do is package it. Well, we do have a lot of different data, but it's not always the data that we need. And citizen science can't replace the data that we would collect through traditional collection. And so we need to see this as an ecosystem. And so we still need to fund the traditional systems, to build those up. We also then need to develop ways to bring in the citizen science, and then we need to bring in other sorts of information also.
Thank you, Gillian, and that's a brilliant sort of reminding point. I think we would all very much share that emphasis that, you know, this is about an ecosystem, and fundamentally you need to have the building blocks of the statistical system in place, with the anchor of this whole process being the NSO, or, you know, their equivalent data steward, really helping to shepherd all these different actors together and make sure that we maintain high quality in the statistics we're using for monitoring sustainable development. So with that, I think we're going to have to bring the questions from the floor to a close. I'd like to give you all 1 minute, and I am going to keep you to 1 minute to wrap up. Any final thoughts or remarks you want to share with all of our attendees? So I'm going to come to Omar first. Sorry to put you on the spot. Omar, would love just your concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this is an opportunity for NSOs, especially those of us from the developing world, to actually look at opportunities of increasing our voice in the policy space. And we can only increase our voice in the policy space and get the policymakers to listen to us if we are able to churn out more timely and relevant data. I've always maintained that politicians will make the decisions at 3 a.m. when the statisticians are asleep. So how can we prepare ourselves to make sure at 3 a.m. when they decide to make the decisions, there is some information sitting out there that can help them inform the decisions they make? We cannot always do that relying on our official statistical system. We have to explore new ways of getting this out quickly. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Omar. Stephen, your 1 minute.
Thank you. I think I'd like to just come back to the point that Gillian made a couple of years ago, well, a long time ago now, when big data erupted on the scene. We all thought it was, you know, the new panacea, it would replace traditional data. And then bit by bit, we realized that wasn't the case at all. In fact, the real challenge was integration. And in fact, using big data can be every bit as expensive as using survey data. So I think the point that Gillian made is super important. All these new types of data, whether it's citizen science, big data, whatever it is, it's not about replacing anything. It's actually about enriching the data sources we have. So, and it's back to the point that you made as well, Jess. So this is about having legal infrastructure so that we can safely use these data. We can use them ethically so we can get the best value out of them without compromising individual privacy, without compromising communities in any way, so that we can get the best out of the asset, which is the data. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Brilliant point. Absolutely. Gillian, over to you.
I just want to come back. I think everyone has made excellent points, and just listening to the panel that I'm on, you know, it might seem like this is still something that is under development, but I want to say, you know, I've been a statistician with the UN for almost 15 years now. And when I joined the UN and people talked about environment statistics, the whole field of environment statistics, it was seen as a fringe area that a lot of NSOs weren't incorporating into their practices. So if you look now, 15 years later, today, it's a huge switch. People, I mean, NSOs and the international community see these things as being mainstream. And even compared to a few years back where citizen science was really a fringe thing that wasn't even hardly considered by statisticians, now it is a mainstream conversation. How do we do it? Not should we do it? And so I think that this is a great opportunity, and we really have made a lot of progress towards better measuring our world. And, you know, I think in 5 years, we'll see even more progress. So I think we're on the right track.
I think we should all agree, everyone on this panel, that we will reconvene in 5 years' time and watch our recording before and after and see how much progress we've made. Camden, I want to come to you. What's your concluding remarks and your thoughts on next steps for your programme in particular?
I'll just to repeat it for the third time, work with NSOs as early as possible when designing your programs. Work with NSOs, talk to them, make sure they know what you're doing, make sure the data are then used. Remember also to serve and to engage with the communities that you're working with as your priority, because remember, it's actually their data. They own it, they collected it, they need to have that transparency, they need to feel that ownership of the data as well, because they're putting in the hard work, they're putting in often the free work in a situation where there can be a lot of work. Also, I just want to plug open data. I think if we're going to do this, data have to be open, they have to be transparent, QAs and QCs around it. We have to make our methodologies available to everyone and make sure that as much as possible, if we are working alongside other programs, we share data across programs. So open APIs can help with that, technology can help with that, but openness is critical. And then alongside that, protect the privacy and security of the data, but also the community is submitting it. So that's really, really critical. We know that environmental activists have come to untimely deaths around the world, and we do need to protect those communities first and foremost while making that data open. And then finally, just trust citizen science data. Citizen science, I think there's a comment in the Identify right now. It's no different to traditional science. You can have bad traditional science, you can have bad citizen science. You can also have really, really good citizen science. So long as we're following those programs, getting the data quality right, we can trust it.
Thank you so much, Camden. That's brilliant. Gillian, I'm sad that our citizen science superheroes left the screen. I hope he comes back. I thought he was a great champion for what we've been talking about today. Dilek, final and closing remarks from you before we wrap up.
I think I will just repeat what I say usually in these panels. So we have been particularly focusing today about citizen science contributions to data, but we believe that citizen science has also the potential to raise awareness and mobilize action, as I said in the beginning of my presentation, to be able to address the greatest challenges of our time. So I'm sure Camden would support me on this. There are many citizen science initiatives that reported on through various channels, including peer-reviewed publications, that participating in citizen science initiatives could help changing behaviors, which is very much important and effective probably than the regulations. For instance, participating in an air quality monitoring project could change people's driving habits, or joining in a marine litter data collection effort, changing people's behaviors about using single-use plastics. So, but however, we need to consider that these changes could happen with good design, as all my colleagues mentioned today. So we need to learn from successful initiatives, how they did it, or how we need to design our projects if we want to achieve these learning outcomes as well as monitoring outcomes.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dilek. A very good final remark that, of course, we all have to be learning from each other and forming a community of practice if we really want this whole field to become mainstream and be very much part of the normal conversation 5 years from now, as we've said. So with that, I will just thank you all so much for joining us for this great session. Thank you to our brilliant panelists for their inspiring remarks, and great to hear of all the really practical programs that you're all doing, you know, in Ghana with Camden's work, with UNEP and the CBD's work, and of course with Stephen and Dilek's ongoing work in the international system. So thank you so much, everyone. And we do hope that you'll check back in to see the summary and the panels and the papers and the presentation that are all on the Attendify platform. And if you want to contact us, our contact details are online. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Right, thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.